July 14, 1789? The streets of Paris are filled with thousands of angry citizens. They march toward the Bastille, a fortress prison that symbolizes royal tyranny. Inside the Palace of Versailles, just 12 miles away, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette live in unimaginable luxury while the common people starve. France's top 1% owns over 40% of all the nation's wealth. The middle class is drowning in debt. Young people see no future. Within hours, the Bastille will fall. Within 5 years, the guillotine will run with blood, and the entire social order of France will collapse. But here's what most people don't understand. This wasn't unique to France. It wasn't about bad kings or angry mobs. It was the continuation of a pattern that has repeated itself 4 times across 3 centuries. And if history is any guide, we're watching that pattern unfold again right now. To understand what's coming, we need to go back. The pattern always starts the same way. Extreme wealth inequality. When a tiny elite controls almost half of a nation's resources, while the majority struggles to survive, a pressure builds. It builds slowly at first. Resentment, frustration, a sense that the system is rigged, and then something happens, an economic shock, a political crisis, a spark, and suddenly, everything that seemed stable explodes into chaos. This is the cycle of revolution, and it has happened 4 times in modern history. The first was the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. The numbers tell the story. France's top 1% owned 40% of all wealth. The aristocracy paid almost no taxes. The peasants and urban workers carried the entire tax burden. Bread prices had doubled. Unemployment was rampant. Young men couldn't afford to marry or start families. The king's court spent lavishly while the country went bankrupt. Then came the spark. A financial crisis forced the king to call the Estates General, a parliamentary body that hadn't met in over a century. That single decision opened the floodgates. Within months, the revolution began. The Bastille fell. The monarchy was overthrown. Thousands were executed. The entire aristocratic class was either killed or fled the country. And France would never be the same. But the pattern didn't stop there. Fast forward to 1917. The Russian Revolution. Again, the same conditions. Russia's top 1% owned 43% of the nation's wealth. The Tsar lived in palaces while factory workers lived in slums. Wages were stagnant. Food was scarce. World War I had devastated the economy and killed millions of young men. The people were exhausted, angry, and then came the spark. Bread shortages in Petrograd led to strikes. The strikes became protests. The protests became riots. The SAR soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. Within days, the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty collapsed. The Bolsheviks seized power. And once again, the entire ruling class was either executed or exiled. Millions died in the chaos that followed. Move forward to 1949. The Chinese Revolution. China had been in turmoil for decades. Civil war, Japanese invasion, famine. But beneath it all, the same pattern. A tiny landlord class owned most of the country's arable land. Peasants worked as virtual slaves, paying crushing rents and taxes. Young people had no hope of ever owning land or escaping poverty. Inflation destroyed savings. Corruption was everywhere, and the government, led by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists, was seen as hopelessly corrupt and out of touch. Mao Zedong's communists promised land reform and equality. Millions of peasants joined the revolution. By 1949, the nationalists fled to Taiwan. The landlord class was eliminated, and Mao established the People's Republic of China. Once again, the old order was completely overturned. The fourth example is more recent. The Arab Spring, 2010 to 2012. This wasn't one revolution, but a wave of them. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain. The pattern was identical. High youth unemployment, often above 30%. Authoritarian governance that had ruled for decades. Massive wealth inequality, with ruling families controlling enormous fortunes, while young people couldn't find jobs. Rising food prices, stagnant wages, a sense that the system was rigged and unchangeable. Then came the spark. In Tunisia, a street vendor named Mohamed Bouzizi set himself on fire after police confiscated his cart. His death ignited protests. The protests spread across social media. Within weeks, Tunisia's dictator fled. Egypt's Mubarak fell next. Libya's Gaddafi was killed. Syria descended into civil war. The entire Middle East was thrown into chaos, and while some revolutions succeeded and others failed, the old order was shattered across the region. For revolutions, 300 years. One pattern. Every single time, the conditions were the same. Extreme wealth concentration at the top, a struggling middle class. High youth unemployment, rising costs of basic necessities. A political system that seems unchangeable, and then a triggering event. Sometimes it's a financial crisis. Sometimes it's a food shortage. Sometimes it's a single act of injustice that goes viral. But once the spark ignites, the explosion is inevitable. And history shows us that no ruling class, no matter how powerful, survives once this pattern reaches its final stage. So here's the question. Where are we now? Let's look at the numbers. In the United States, the top 1% owns 32% of all wealth. That number has been climbing steadily for 40 years. It's approaching the 40% threshold that preceded every revolution in history. Income inequality is at its highest level since 1929, right before the Great Depression. The median home price is 8 times the median income. In the 1970s, it was 2 times. Student debt has reached $1.7 trillion. An entire generation is in debt before they even start their careers. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, have been stagnant for over 40 years. Meanwhile, productivity has doubled. Workers are producing twice as much value but taking home the same paycheck. Young people today face challenges their parents never imagined. Most will never own a home. Many can't afford to have children. Job security is a myth. Healthcare costs are crushing, and retirement seems impossible. The social contract, the idea that if you work hard you can build a stable life, has broken. People feel it. They know the system isn't working. Across the political spectrum, from left to right, there's a growing sense that the game is rigged, and that's exactly how every revolutionary period begins. Now add the triggering events. The 2008 financial crisis, where banks were bailed out but ordinary people lost their homes. The COVID pandemic, which made billionaires richer while millions lost their jobs. The January 6 Capitol riot. The George Floyd protests, the resurgence of labor strikes. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a system under enormous strain. The pressure is building, and history tells us what happens next. But here's the critical question. Does the pattern have to repeat? Can we avoid what came before? History offers some clues. Every successful revolution happened because the ruling class refused to reform. France's aristocracy could have agreed to pay taxes. They didn't. Russia's Tsar could have implemented democratic reforms. He didn't. China's nationalists could have addressed land inequality. They didn't. The Arab dictators could have allowed free elections and economic opportunity. They didn't. In every case, the people in power believed they were untouchable. They believed the system would hold forever. And they were wrong. The revolutions that were avoided are less famous but just as instructive. Britain in the 1800s faced similar conditions but implemented gradual reforms. Labor rights, voting rights, social safety nets. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't fast, but it released enough pressure to avoid full collapse. The New Deal in 1930s America did the same thing. Social security, unemployment insurance, labor protections, massive public investment. These weren't acts of kindness. They were survival mechanisms. Roosevelt himself said he was saving capitalism from the capitalists. And it worked. The pressure was released. The system adapted. And revolution was avoided. So what happens next in America and across the developed world? We're at a crossroads. One path leads to reform. Higher wages, affordable housing, student debt relief, universal health care, policies that restore the social contract and give young people hope for the future. The other path leads to continued stagnation, more wealth concentration, more inequality, more frustration, and eventually, a breaking point. History suggests we don't have much time. The gap between extreme inequality and social explosion is usually measured in years, not decades. The pattern has been consistent for 300 years. Stage 1. Inequality reaches extreme levels. Stage 2. The middle class collapses and young people lose hope. Stage 3. Triggering events create instability. Stage 4. Revolution. We're somewhere between Stage 2 and Stage 3 right now. Whether we reach Stage 4 depends on choices that are being made today. By governments, by corporations, by the people who hold power. Will they reform the system, Or will they hold on until it breaks? History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes! And the rhyme we're hearing now sounds disturbingly familiar. For revolutions, 3 centuries. One pattern,